Error Correction for Teachers of English to Speakers of Other Languages. Part 2. Correcting with Positivity. In the previous video, we talked about determining which errors to correct. In this video, we'll look at different ways to correct errors and how to avoid shaming or embarrassing our students when correcting errors. So now that we've talked about which errors to correct, let's think a bit about how we actually correct them. There are many different ways to correct errors, and you might want to try out different ones in different situations. Studies show that students are most likely to remember an error correction if it was a self-correction. That is, if the student made the error and then made the correction herself. For this reason, most of these error correction techniques are intended to give students time to first fix their own errors. Here are a few common ways to address errors. 1. Repeating back. Often the student just needs to hear the error or slow down a bit and think about it again. You can repeat the sentence back so the student can hear it again and show through your tone of voice and facial expressions that a correction needs to be made. This could sound like, "You swimmed in the pool?" Make sure you give the student plenty of time to think. Remember, he has to think about what you said, what the error is, and what the correct form is, and that could take a while. Sometimes, if you don't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation, you might choose to offer the correction yourself in the form of a recast, or a paraphrased sentence with the correct form. You can think of casting out a fishing line a second time to try again. So if your student said she swimmed in the pool, you might say, "Oh, you swam in the pool? Did you have fun?" Be ready for the fact that she might not notice the correction. If she doesn't seem to notice, you could file this error away to address more explicitly later on, or just choose to let it go for the moment to continue your conversation. 2. Hand gestures. Some teachers choose to develop a more complex system of error correction that doesn't use words at all, but only hand signals. This system might seem a bit daunting at first, but once you and your students get used to it, they will adapt to correcting their own errors right away. When you hear a sentence like, "I swimmed in the pool," hold up your hand and have the student repeat the sentence again, touching one finger for each word. Eventually, your students will learn to repeat the sentence when you hold up your hand as a signal. Pause on the word with the error by pausing on the same finger to signal that this is the word the student needs to fix. In this way, the student is doing the work by repeating the sentence and figuring out the error, and you're just giving a silent cue to help him identify what needs to be fixed. 3. Delayed correction. Many times, we don't want to correct an error right away. We don't want to lower our student's confidence or frustrate her by interrupting her train of thought because she's doing the hard work of communicating in another language. Or we might notice an error that a student makes in a partner or small group discussion, but we think it would be useful for the whole class to hear the correction. How then can that error be corrected without embarrassing the student in front of the whole class? Some teachers choose to collect certain errors throughout class to address later. For example, as students talk in pairs or small groups, you can move around and listen to their conversations, and you might write down a few sentences with errors that you hear. When the whole class is working together again, you can share those sentences on the board, without saying who said them, and have the class correct the errors together. In this way, the error is still addressed for the class to learn from, but the speaker doesn't get embarrassed in front of everyone. You can also use this model with addressing errors in writing. Make note of a few written errors you see and present them on the board as a warm-up at the beginning of the next class. You can even change the sentence a bit to have the same type of error, but different information, if you think the sentence would give away the author's identity. Avoiding shame. We've mentioned avoiding shaming or embarrassing students several times already. This is so important for our students to feel safe and comfortable to keep trying and using the language. Many world cultures and educational systems employ shame as a tactic to get students to work harder in class, but it can also mean that students won't feel comfortable speaking up. In an English class, we definitely want all of our students to speak up. Take time to get to know your students. Notice, how do they respond to correction? Do some students do better with some forms of correction and others with other kinds? Try to personalize your approach to error correction. You may treat errors differently in different classes or with different students. Are some of your students afraid of making mistakes and ask you for help all the time? If so, you might try gently encouraging them to try first, and then helping if they still don't know. As you continue learning about your students and trying different methods of error correction, you will find what works best for each student and each class. As a teacher, your intuition is important. Become a student of your students and learn what their body language and cues mean to determine which error correction methods are most effective for them. If your students are at higher levels, or if you can communicate in your students' first language, have a class discussion about error correction and explain to them how and why you correct errors the way you do. They will be encouraged to hear that you have a method for this and honor your professionalism as their teacher. If you missed it, be sure to go back and watch part 1 of this video series looking at choosing which errors to correct, and be sure to watch the other videos on the Restoring Hope Roanoke channel to learn more about all of our initiatives.